Hey everyone, tune in to my full conversation with Mathilde Loujayne, talking about faith, spirituality, big little steps, Islam, all covered in the Basel Meets podcast. Just search Basel Meets on iTunes or Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts to listen to the full hour. Woo! We're live! I want to first say I got my old friend.
Mm-hmm. Not
first.
an age.
Not an age. Not an age at all. No. I think we're the same age, actually.
1984.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're the same age.
Yeah, okay,
all right.
fine.
When's it? Like May, right?
March. You're June.
There was an M in there, so I remember there's an M in there. I'm in June. That's amazing. You remember that.
Because my daughter was born in June as well.
Oh, what?
And my husband was born in June, so it's,
okay,
you know,
so for
remember.
a second there, I felt special. Just like a split second. Well, my old friend, not an age, Mathilde Loujayne.
Loujayne. That's my Islamic name.
That's your Islamic name, and we're going to get into that. An author of of the new book coming out
Tonight.
There you go. So, this is just before the book comes out.
Yeah.
Big little steps. So I'm so proud to have you here because you're the first author that I had on the podcast.
Awesome. Well, it's my pleasure. I'm super excited. Like I was saying, I've known you for like 10, 11 years.
I know, yeah.
So it's crazy. I think it was back in 2007 when I moved to Dubai. And that's when we met for work. And then, since then, it's been great. We've been keeping in touch. So it's...
Right?
Yeah,
it's crazy. Like, we kept in touch. And and I know this, it's crazy. We've been, I've seen... we've worked on several projects throughout the years, but it's always that your personal story was something that always kept me maybe that's what kept us more in touch throughout the years. And I remember well, let's just right off the bat, you're a Muslim, and the reason we say that fact is because your book is about that very thing, right? So if maybe we could do or just before we get into that, I remember you tweeting, what was it, like 7 years ago or something like that.
Yeah. You
were tweeting, and I was like, man, she's tweeting a lot of things about Islam. And for people who don't know, Mathilde is French, so I'm like, Mathilde, are you just like interested in Islam, or like what's going on here? Like what's that? And you were like, no, I'm Muslim. I was like, whoa. Wow, and at that point, I've known you for like 5 years, maybe.
True, yeah.
So I was like, I had no idea,
Right, I remember that, and I think that's when, we became closer friends. Like it went from work to being like an actual friendship because it was like,
Well, I'm just interested in people with like personal stories, do you know what I mean? That have and feel comfortable sharing their personal stories.
Yeah.
And I think you were comfortable enough to this is a guy who I've worked with for a few projects, and you were comfortable enough to share your experience, and I was like, well, this is cool, and I think from that it developed more of an intellectual sort of like ideas of we discuss these ideas and so on, and I like that a lot, and that's what's cool. And here you are today talking about you releasing a book, so that's very cool. And tell us, like, what's that about?
So I've been so passionate about Islam, and so that's why I love talking about it, is because when you find something that clicks and that when you're so into it, then you just want to kind of shout it on the rooftops. And for me, Islam has played that role for me in my life, where I've always been a very spiritual person, and I'll go into more detail, my own spiritual journey in a bit. But just writing the book for me was taking this extra step to present Islam from a feminine perspective, and without noticing it, I became an ambassador of Islam.
Right.
As a French woman, and people would see me fasting, or they would see me go to the mosque, and so people just naturally ask questions about Islam just to understand it better, which I love. I mean, it's building a dialogue is very positive. So I just thought it's been a dream of mine since 2009 to write a book on Islam and for women specifically. But then life just kind of happens. Like I changed jobs and got married and had a baby, and it was just
marriage, man.
Gets
in the way, man.
And it was just like this distant dream of mine, and last year I thought, I don't want to get old and regret it.
Right.
And so I quit my job in September. And I thought, I'm just going to do this full time. and just get it done, and it has to happen no matter what.
Yeah.
And so it's here. So yeah, I'm really excited.
That's amazing.
Yes.
And so the book itself is, I mean, it hasn't been released yet, so I didn't have the chance to go through it. But we did go through several things throughout the book, and it's interesting that you chose the area of feminism and just sort of targeted towards women. In particular, is that because of your journey, or is that because of your personal experience in finding the answers?
Yeah, I mean, so I converted to Islam when I was 18 years old.
Right.
So that was in 2002. So obviously over the years I've learned a lot, and I've met a lot of other women who were either converting to Islam, or they were maybe just keen to know more about Islam, wanting to understand it. And I've just realized that, it's always the same questions that keep coming back. And that's why I thought, well, I need to put this together in a kind of guide. And I'm in marketing as well. So, I just thought the way you package it as well is really important. Like the way I have to make it appealing. I have to make it like feminine looking. So you want to actually read it. And,
right.
I thought it was a gap in the market, because there are no books like this that are written for one by a woman to other women, or by a convert to other converts, or by a Western woman. So we needed to have that voice out there, and so that's how the idea was born. And I have my own story, my own experiences, but I wanted to get other women's experiences as well. So I did a SurveyMonkey online.
Of course, that's the most relied, way of researching.
Of course, and it just went viral, and so many women of all different backgrounds and ages started getting back to me with their own experiences, what they wish they had known, or before converting to Islam, or non-Muslim women telling me what they would like to know about Islam. So I kind of put everything together all in one, so that it's not just my own experience, but it's women from all over the world.
So if you had one question that kept repeating from different people, do you have that question that keeps popping in your mind?
Well, you're just talking about feminism,
right?
So I think women's rights is
women's
huge.
Rights.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I've made it a point to go into detail in the book, and to explain how, first of all, I talk about women, all the inspirational women and role models in Islam, and not just only in Islam, but before Mary, the mother of Jesus, who is mentioned in the Quran, who is a huge role model for Muslim women as well. And, going way back to the time of Moses as well, peace be upon him, and his adoptive mother, who was the wife of Pharaoh. So I go way back in time, showing look, these are all powerful women and amazing women, and they were pious, and they were knowledgeable, and they were educated about their faith. And so I really try to highlight education for one, and knowledge, and seeking knowledge. But then, so as I move on, then I go into what Islam, how the revelation of the Quran changed things for women at the time of in the 7th century.
Right.
And I talk about the top 10 women's rights, for example, the right to vote, which they didn't have before, or the right to marry whoever they would like to marry. So no forced marriages in Islam, no female infanticides, the right to...
No female what?
Infanticides. So killing girls at birth.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, a lot of people think that it's
that word.
It's a tradition. Which
right here, that's the first time I hear that word.
Okay. Maybe that's from maybe it's French, and I've just made it English.
Probably, yeah. Okay. Interesting. Yeah.
So,
there was an issue, I think, in 7th century Arabia. Where these issues were prevalent, right?
Well, women were not respected, period.
Right.
Some of them even thought they were bad omens, they were bad luck. And so Islam really changed, revolutionized the whole region, and the way people thought, and the way men respected and treated women.
Right. Well, it's so interesting that you say that, because just before our podcast, I was listening to... I was watching, actually, a show on Abu Dhabi TV, and it was this guy called Mohammed Shahrour. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He's like I guess he's what you call a researcher into Islamic affairs or so on.
Okay.
Or Islamic, doctrine. So he was talking exactly about that, where it was that the message of Islam at that time was to revolutionize and to sort of put change in society.
Okay.
And move society forward based on what it was. So it was like the very constant of what it was before, and then that came to sort of like change and revolutionize that society to move forward. Okay. So it's interesting that you mentioned that.
Yeah, it's very important. I mean, a lot of people don't realize that, and I just thought, we need to highlight that. And then I also move on to the golden age. A lot of women made discoveries in medicine or science. Also, I kind of talk about a few of those women. And the women of today, I mean, for example, Malala, I think she's amazing.
Right.
What she's doing is incredible.
Absolutely. Malala Yousafzai. I'm saying her name right?
Yeah.
Look, if you don't know who she is by now, you're living under a rock. So you need to look her up.
Yeah, David Letterman. Latest interview.
She's like saying that she was on his interview.
Yeah. So, I mean, she's great. And just looking around us, there are so many Muslim women that, I don't want them to be judged just by their cover, literally.
Right.
Just because they're Muslim or because they're wearing the hijab or because of XYZ. I mean, these are women who are intelligent, smart, educated, and, loving, caring, and, a sense of humor, you name it. And so I just want to avoid the discrimination.
So when you want to say you want to start a dialogue, is that a dialogue between Muslims, or is it a dialogue between Muslims and non-Muslims?
Non-Muslims.
And non-Muslims.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I have a lot of friends and family members who are not Muslims. And so I wanted to write this for them too. I mean, of course, I told my parents, and they were very supportive.
Right.
But I just thought, I would love for my mom to really get it and understand where I'm coming from, and, that I'm not going to change. I'm still me, same person, and just that I'll be like a better version of myself. And so that's how the idea came to write the book. And so I want to create this dialogue with non-Muslims who, want to understand Islam better. And
I want to refer back to your story, and going back to the beginning. How does one reach to this major decision in their life where they think or they feel and they believe that they want to follow a certain set of, beliefs? Do you know what I mean? Like, how did that get to you? Like, and you did it at such a young age as well.
Yeah.
I mean, 18, right? Like at 18, I remember I was just very much concerned about if, the girl I saw in college really recognized me when I entered class. That was my main concern in life. On the other side of the world, there was you, and you were thinking about much bigger issues. So,
like I said earlier, I've always been a very spiritual person to begin with. So I can remember. So my family was atheist.
Right.
And so I didn't have a religious upbringing. And around the age of 7 or 8 years old, I started asking questions like, who created this earth? Who created the universe? Like, I just wanted to make sense out of it. Like, there had to be like a bigger, form. Or I actually turned to school because I was going to a Catholic school at the time. So I turned to...
This was in France?
Yeah, in south of France, yeah. Okay. So I was in Marseille.
Right.
Marseille at the time. And so I asked them questions, and so I came to learn about God and, his creations. And so I told my parents, well, I'd like to get baptized. So my parents were like, okay, great. So like I said, they're extremely supportive. So I'm very, very lucky and blessed to have my parents have raised me like that.
Perfect, yeah.
And so I got baptized when I was 10 years old. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know that at the time my father actually embraced Islam.
Oh.
Yeah, he didn't tell my mom and myself. Like, he kept it to himself for a few years. I guess he didn't know how his family would react, and he had actually survived cancer.
Okay.
So for him, that was his own, journey, and he survived. He wasn't supposed to live after like 3 months, and so it was kind of a miracle that he was still alive. And so he started asking himself questions, and so that led him to Islam.
Wow.
And so. But I didn't know that at the time.
And you were 10 years old at the time?
I was 10 years old, yeah. And so my parents allowed me to get baptized, and so I was really into it.
So sorry, you would go to church with your parents, or
no, just on my own.
Just on your own,
on my own with school, or so it was, the whole family was atheist, so they were like, okay, it's kind of funny that she's becoming religious, but whatever.
It's her thing.
It's her thing, okay. So then we moved to the Middle East, and I went to an international school, so lots of different cultures and backgrounds, and I started talking with my friends about religions and things about teenagers, really, issues about teenagers, and it just kind of opened my mind that I need to learn more in general, and I need to be like better understanding, and I would see people fasting. I would see just different religions in general, and I just thought, what, I need to start reading a bit more. And so like September 11th happened, and obviously I was like beyond shocked when that happened, as the whole world was, and I was 17 years old when that happened. And at that
point, did you know your dad was Muslim? Or
yes, I did. Yeah. Okay. And so we would often have debates, and I was like a typical stubborn teenager,
right? Okay.
like with my own ideas, and so, but it was nice to...
Not a typical teenager at all, actually, because you were debating like very big ideas. Anyway, okay, so September 11th.
And then, I was living in Oman, which is like super peaceful, and the Omanis are so warm and welcoming, and it was such a contrast with what people were starting to say about Muslims and, terrorism. And then here I was living in a Muslim country, which is so peaceful. I just didn't make sense to me. And I thought, well, my dad is Muslim, and if I'm going to start reading about different religions, I might as well just start by Islam and reading the Quran. And I have one at home, so I borrowed my dad's. So that was in September. And then in March, so I was reading every day. And in March, I told my parents, well, I'm convinced. I didn't finish writing it. I was about halfway through the Quran at that time. But that was it for me. I was already on board.
Okay.
I was on board, and I said to my parents, look, I want to become a Muslim. And my mom was like, what's next? First this, now this. Okay, what's happening in 10 years? So
I'll let you know.
No, but they were very supportive, and I told my mom, no, this is it. This is I found the truth that I was looking for, and this is really what I was looking for all these years. I was looking for the truth. Like, I wanted to have the authentic Word of God, because obviously the Quran is, like we were talking earlier, has stayed authentic,
right,
and it hasn't been changed or modified by mankind. And so as I knew that, I read the Quran as if it was really God, like talking to me directly. Gotcha. Almost, which is why it had such a huge impact. And so that's how it happened. That's the whole thing. And then I thought that was kind of the end of my spiritual journey, becoming a Muslim. Like, okay, I've been looking for all my life. Now it's happened. I can relax. I didn't know that Islam was also a way of life, and that it was to be a practicing Muslim, then you need to, it's a day-to-day thing. You apply it in so many ways, whether it's, modesty, or your relationship with others, or, fasting, why we fast, this is also why I wanted to write a book which explains this way of life, and,
right?
Yeah, and what you're getting yourself into.
It's very interesting though, because like when we talk about spirituality and like these topics are so heavy, because whoever you sit with, that person or that any person would have an opinion on these topics, because everyone holds such things very closely to their hearts, whether they believe or the lack of belief.
Yeah, and it's whatever. Emotional, isn't it?
And a lot of it's based on emotions, and a lot of it, that's the problem, right? Because a lot of people base their arguments on emotions, and it's just so very interesting that you started from such a young age to question and look at these topics. I mean, that's pretty amazing to me, just by virtue that you were a 10-year-old who started questioning these things that are much larger than all of us. When you said you were looking for a truth, that's a very interesting way to put it. Like, I'm looking for the truth, and I found the truth. And is there do you remember a moment where you felt, well, this is it. Like, this here is what I feel made me say that this to me is my truth?
There are a lot. It's hard to think of one. I think.
I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but I mean, like, no, just maybe in general, like.
Yeah. I mean, I was going through what I didn't mention is that I had lost someone close to me in my family who passed away at a young age. And so while I was a teenager, I was grieving and going through a lot of questions about understanding death and understanding, what happens after, and will I ever get to see that person again? And, all these things, like when you're young and confused and trying to make sense out of something tragic and quite dramatic. And so that, I think that's also what I was looking for while doing my research in religions. And then while I was specifically reading the Quran, this was always my, I was reading it through that eye of a grieving person and wanting to find peace. Okay. Which I did. And that's why it was so quick for me to say that I want to become a Muslim, because I found inner peace almost instantly. Like I said, I didn't even finish reading the whole thing at the time. Right. That I had found this inner peace and the answers to my questions about the whole grieving process and much more. And that's the thing why I can't say, because this is what I was looking for specifically.
That's so interesting.
But then I found a lot more of things that I wasn't even looking for. And so, yeah. It's
interesting because it's so different when somebody, or converts to a certain religion versus somebody who's born into a certain religion. Like I'm sure the mentality is so different.
Sure, I mean, and the culture as well. I mean, because what I love about Islam is it's a universal religion. Right. But throughout this universe, I mean, we have so many different cultures, and we can all kind of adapt. Islam is what it is, and that's fine. But then maybe what you have for iftar is not what I have for iftar. Right. You know what I mean? So
you might have a filet mignon, and I have something really Arabic like mansaf.
So cultures play an important role as well, because Asians can have like a different Islamic culture where ours would be different, but it's still the same. We still have things in common in Islam that are universal. So
right, yeah, that's so interesting. It's for me, I think a lot of people go through maybe what you've been through, but on a maybe a smaller scale, because obviously yours started at an early age, and also it involved a grieving process as well. So obviously that's a very profound experience for you. I think for me, at somewhere in my 20s. I just threw my hat into the table, threw in the towel, and I was like, guys, I need to read into everything, because I'm not sure what I believe anymore, that sort of thing, and for the longest time, spirituality was very important for me as well, and finding something to believe in, and finding, the true purpose of life, and sometimes. Like, I think you said it. What happened? Like the thinking of, or the phrase of death and what happens after. That's also something that's a constant, right? In my mind, it's like, well, what? Like, what's the point, right? Like, we live 70 years, 80 years, and then that's that. Like, what's the point? And I think that's when you start like asking bigger questions. Like, well, who is God, and why did he create us, and like all these big questions. And today I consider myself to be a believer, of course, in God and in religion, and I have faith and everything, but in a very different way than I used to have it, like, let's say 10 years ago, where I used to be very like, okay, here's what I was told to believe, so that's that. Okay. I'm just going to follow this, and I'll be good. I'm going to go to heaven, it'll be fine. But I think I've really moved on from that, and now, because I feel like at some point I started struggling within myself to find the real, why do I believe what I believe, and not suspended to what people told me to believe, kind of thing, and I think just seeing people pray and seeing people praise God and stuff like that, it's just made me think a lot about like, what are they doing, and like, what does that mean? And then I went in this rabbit hole for like a year or 2 years. And it was in that time when I think I saw your tweets.
Okay.
You know, and because I had all these thoughts in my head, I was like, you know, it would be really cool to have that conversation with you as well, because it seems like you're in a similar journey too. And let's like compare notes, you know, let's see like, what do you got? Like, let's see what you got. Like, I'd like to see how I compare my notes with yours. And it's interesting because also you've introduced me to other people as well. You know, just who I met through their journeys too. Yeah. But like today, we're all in different places, but still we sort of like kind of believe the same thing. But we do believe the same thing because we're all Muslims. I think we've all landed in the same sort of vicinity. But I realized the variety within Islam, kind of thing. You know, from my perspective, like seeing the different sort of ways of people package it in their minds and what it means to them, and you know, so from somebody like you to somebody like me to somebody who perhaps is way more like right-wing you know, person who so it's very interesting to see the variety of beliefs and how people get to their and I find the word truth itself to be a very interesting word, because I think as there is a truth, there's established truths, and then there is, you know, what is true to me and what is true to you and that sort of thing. So I find that very interesting, this whole, you know, world very, very interesting. Yeah. But yeah, I think reaching there, and I think part of that was also like rights and human rights and women's rights and stuff like that. That's very interesting. And I find that so interesting from your side as well, that you've decided to just, you know, focus on that, like women's rights as well, and write on it, and that for me is also super interesting too. I keep saying interesting a lot, although I hear myself on the podcast afterwards. Yeah, everything for me is interesting. But yeah, so and I remember throughout the years when we used to talk, you also used to have these questions about like, well, what does this mean in terms of rights? What does this mean in terms of you know, the women's rights and so on? And your evolution to get to this book right here is so interesting to me, like how you actually got here. Yeah,
I think you have a keyword right there, is evolution, because I think that's, you know, we're born, and then we're on this journey and we progress. And it's not about like taking something and going full board, you know, with full force into it, you know, like it's about understanding and asking questions. Like you were saying earlier, you were asking yourself questions and trying to understand things. I think that's a very healthy process. And absolutely. And then because once you do find these answers, then at least you have comfort in your heart that, you know, okay, it makes sense. There's a logic behind it, and I'm, you know, 100% comfortable with my decision, and which I'm sure you are, because I mean you're still Muslim today, so
still here. Right?
So that's something I try to highlight in the book, is that, and that's why it's called Big Little Steps as well, is because, you know, we take baby steps and we continue to grow as human beings in general, but also, you know, as spiritual beings, and our faith as well, you know, continues to grow. So yeah, it's called Big Little Steps. So because of that reason, but also because there's a hadith which says, if you take one step towards me, I'll take 10 towards you. And if you walk towards me, I'll run towards you. And I just thought that sums it up perfectly, that if we just have if we just have the intention of getting closer to God, He will just, you know, run towards you and grab you. And like, you might think it's a little step to ask a question or two, but it's actually a big step in the eyes of God too, that you're learning about Him and you're showing the effort. So this book, you know, again, we go to the word of truth, came from a place of truth for you, right? So which is after the age of 18, you found some difficulties in realigning your lifestyle to your new chosen lifestyle, right? Yeah. So what kind of difficulties did you face? For example, I didn't realize that, you know, Muslims were praying 5 times a day. Like, I knew it, but it was like, oh, does that apply to me too? Like,
do I have to do it?
You know what I mean? So it took me a while to get there, you know. And basically, as soon as I converted to Islam, I also graduated from high school. So I moved back to France. I moved to Paris. And I'd lost interest in like, drinking alcohol or like going out and stuff. Like it happened gradually, but eventually I was like, it's not really making me that happy. You know what I mean? So then also the kinds of, friendships that I had kind of changed. It's just, I think my interests in general changed. And, I was maybe a bit more superficial in my friendships before that. And I was looking for a bit more substance. And then, I started working. I was in the music industry for like 7 years, maybe.
Right. Well, that's how we knew each other from the music industry.
Yes,
I had never worked in the music industry. I kind of pretended that I did, but I actually didn't.
Because you were always around.
I was always around the music industry for sure, yeah.
But, it was an awesome experience to work in music. And, it took me years to realize that, this is not for me either, because I would look at the artists, and we're talking like A-list artists, right? Like huge artists. And I would look at them, and I would, actually go on tour with some of them and so on, and talk to them. And, either they were really unhappy in their life, always traveling, or, no meaningful relationships. They didn't trust their entourage, or they were, taking drugs and alcohol and just living a miserable life, really, at the end of the day. I mean, this is, after all the glamour is,
right.
Like lights off, cameras off, they're in their room backstage, like they're really not that happy. And so it just made me realize, like, this is not an industry that I want to be in anymore. And so I went into like the corporate world, like 360 every shift. But it taught me a lot, and I've also met so many people a few people who also went on the journey to embrace Islam as well. And so they went from like touring and, performing on stage to finding a more quiet and peaceful life in Islam. So it's really inspiring as well to be able to witness someone else's journey and to see the positive changes that, how it affects them. So
interesting.
It's been a good adventure, yeah.
Wow. And it's very interesting that you say about the artists who, like, at the end of the day aren't happy. It's so interesting because you hear that from, like, that's not just you, right? A lot of people say that, like, but all the lights and all the money and all these people don't bring you happiness.
Yeah. And
I started wondering about that, but isn't it relative to the person? I don't know. Maybe it's just the amount of attention you get. I don't know what it is that makes these people unhappy. Like, that's very strange for me.
It's the ups and downs, because, but I don't know. I mean, the way I see it, because obviously there's so much hype. Like when there's a concert or like a festival, there's so much hype and interviews and, sound checks, and, they get so much attention. And then the next day it's like, okay, you're going home and it's quiet. And so I think like going through these, like the roller coaster is hard for any human being.
I feel like it's a bubble, right? Like I think a lot of people live in bubbles, especially when they start becoming very successful and they become surrounded by yes men, and then they become surrounded by their fans, and it's just become this bubble that you created for yourself.
Right.
So now you take your energy from those people around you rather than finding something of substance that moves you, know? And I think sometimes you need to burst that bubble and sort of like keep yourself grounded the entire time, And no matter how big you get or successful you get, it's almost as a way that you need to make sure that you're always kind of grounded. Yeah,
and it's not easy. I mean, when you're caught up in the machine, like in the industry, it really is like a factory for like making music, and people are, it's hard for anyone to go through that.
I'm sure you're human at the end of the day,
exactly.
Right? Because like if you're human
and they're young usually,
and you're young, and suddenly you have all this afforded to you.
Yeah.
You have like all the money in the world. You're traveling the world. People are adoring you and calling your name, and wherever you arrive, there are fans screaming your name. Like that must do something psychologically to you.
To your ego, and,
I'm sure it does.
Yeah.
Like it's absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
I was, this is a stupid example, but it's funny because I relate that to Metallica's story. And you know how much I love Metallica.
No, really?
Is that a shock to you? I know, you know. But James Hetfield in particular, when he sort of went to rehab and sort of got out of that and stopped drinking and stopped, doing all these extracurricular activities, let's just call them. He stopped doing all of that because that to him, he had to battle not just his addictions, but also his ego. And to a point where he stopped doing meet and greets with fans because, it also fed his addiction personality and his ego personality. So he wanted to cut that completely off and sort of like also work on a schedule where like he isn't away so much from his family and his friends because
to find a balance.
Yeah, because it's when it takes you away from that. He says that like when I'm on tour for so long, I'm in the bubble again, and like. But when I go back home, I'm in real life, and like my wife tells me to like take out the trash, and like, and, like I'm a human again, And it's so interesting. You've seen that firsthand backstage when you saw these artists and
exactly.
And I remember obviously I was always there. And
I turn around, it's like, there he is.
What are you doing here, man? Like everybody would ask me that question. What are you doing here? Like how did you get backstage? But yeah, I remember like you've used to. Like I'm sure it was a very tough job as well. Like
but it was awesome. Like
sure.
I was like I did it from 23 until like I think 27.
It's the most perfect job to do in your 20s. It's like there's nothing better to do.
And it was a lot of fun. I'm not gonna lie, I enjoyed it. I like just the rush and the like. I was hosting those meet and greets with the fans and.
Right.
It's intense for sure. It's it just takes a lot out of you. Like, and that's what another thing I think with the artists is they give so much energy. I mean, if you think about it, they give. On stage or like backstage with the fans, and then I guess they just feel hollow at the end of the day. Like, who gives you that energy back? Like
that's right.
And I would see them backstage sometimes in the meet and greet tents, and they would just like lie down, just sleep and. It was just, I met very few artists who would travel with their family and with their kids. And, a lot of them just lived a life. And then you see that they're fighting with everybody and they're just not happy. So.
Well, ego is very poisonous, I think. Especially when you start getting to a point where you really believe your own hype and your own ego, I think it's like it becomes poisonous. Yeah. I mean, forget big artists, but also like in everyday life, right? This could apply to you if you are a managing director or you're where you start believing your own hype and you start thinking like, well, this is what all matters. Anything that matters to me is that. I think going back to like the spiritual side of things, it's funny because I think a lot of people sometimes become too caught up by the material things in their life. Like how big is the house that they got, or what car are they driving, or and it's so easy to fall into these things. You know what I mean? Like it's and I'm guilty of it as well. Like I am guilty for sure. Like
but everyone is. I mean, that's the world we live in. Is like marketing, and all day long we have these ads. And that's where the world is today. So
it is, and it kind of like. You think about it, that's when you start seeking, I think people start seeking spirituality and maybe religion, sometimes not religion, sometimes people don't seek religion, they seek something else to replace that, I don't know. But that's when there's that area, the void that's missing, that you need to fill it up with something, and it just seems that I meet some people who don't care. Like, no, for me, it's just a career, and that's that, and I don't really care about anything else. Yeah. And that's good for them. I mean, if that works for them, then that works for them. That's cool. And then some people just sort of like delve into other things like faith and spirituality and yoga. Sometimes people do yoga. Right. Some people do podcasting. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, I mean, like that's and for you, you've like left your job and like you dedicated yourself to this because it's interesting how you've
I mean, just because this was my dream, I thought kind of like a mission, my calling, if you will. As a Muslim woman now, like I feel like I'm an ambassador to Islam, and it's given me so much that I also want to give back. And that's my way of doing it, is educating people on forgetting the misconceptions and opening their minds and, try to be more understanding. I've just made sure that, in the book, for example, I've included margins on the side so that if there's something you don't understand, you can take notes and like write all over it and then go back to it later. Or I've made it like interactive. So if I talk about a story that's in the Quran, I'll be like, grab your copy of the Quran and read the verses so and so that people are, it's just not just about the book, but it's also going back to the Quran or, maybe asking your imam or scholar questions. And
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
What do you find is the biggest challenge for Muslims who live in the West? I think I wouldn't call Muslims, what do you call the word? It escapes me, but not all Muslims are the same, right? So like Muslims who live in Europe are probably different from the Muslims who live in North America or Muslims who live in South America and whatever.
Right.
So what's the biggest challenge for Muslims living out in the West?
Well, definitely what the media portray of Muslims and Muslim women. And I'm from France. Not one day goes by where, they talk about Muslims and, it's all very just negative. It's quite saddening, really, that at least we're not given a voice to at least, defend ourselves or speak up for ourselves.
I'm thinking that when you talk about the media, I consume a lot of media and I see like there's a difference in narrative between, for example, if this is a left-leaning progressive publication versus a right-leaning conservative publication. Okay. And I feel like in North America at least, I find that the left-leaning progressive publications are more accepting towards showing, for example, women in hijab, right? And that's more likely to be viewed or more likely to be covered in a more positive light rather than if it's a right-leaning publication. Now, maybe I know this is a sweeping generalization, and I'm sure there are many nuances there that I'm not mentioning, but that's from my consumption of media generally. That's what I'm seeing.
Right. Yeah.
For me, assimilation is a topic that keeps popping in my mind. I don't know if I guess you probably would know a lot about this because your parents-in-law are actually living in France as Muslims. Yeah. And the word assimilation, does that come up in how they assimilate with the rest of society and like how do Muslims sort of like blend in with society rather than have their own little communities? Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
You're right. I mean, that's really important. You have to be a part of the society and find integration. And I mean, they hold like open door events to the mosque. So they invite non-Muslims to the mosque and kind of show, what, the way that Muslims pray or break their fast, or, they invite non-Muslims to break their fast together with them. Okay. That's always usually a good way, to open a discussion at least, so that I think opening a dialogue for them is key. Try to find as many platforms as possible to spread a positive message and break misconceptions.
Yeah, because I think there's a lot of to us, I mean, there is some kind of degree of hate crimes, not hate crimes, but like discrimination, let's say, that happens based on what people see on the media or what they hear from their politicians or what they hear from the leaders. And they might have some kind of fear of their neighbor who happens to be a Muslim or so on. Yeah. So it's just these things are... I think that other than the assimilation part, also is that misconception that you were talking about earlier about like the portrayal of that. But I find that North America has a much more assimilated population when it comes to Muslims. I don't know. I might be wrong, but
from my experience, I mean that's what I've seen as well. And like I spent like maybe a year in LA where I moved there for work. And so I would go to the mosque there. They have a huge Islamic center, and just in general, I feel like people were more accepting, and there was more inclusion. And I
think maybe because the other way around as well. If you look at the Muslims there, I think they identify as, for example, Americans, or they identify as Canadians, and they just sort of like my brother-in-law. He is a huge Toronto Raptors fan, and like he goes and watches the games, and he has the T-shirts and the hats and whatever. Yeah. So, but his Muslim identity maybe doesn't contradict his Canadianness, if you will. Do you know what I mean? So I feel maybe it worked better, I guess, in North America. I don't know why. Maybe It's the culture in general?
Culture, the history, politics, I mean...
History could be a part of it, actually.
Yeah,
you're right.
In France, it plays a big role.
Could be also like because North America is largely based on immigration as well. So it's a country of immigrants anyway, right? So maybe that's the mentality as well. Could be that as well.
Yeah, could be.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, those are always things that when you see the news and stuff like that, I start thinking about these things, and as a Western Muslim yourself, I'm sure these are things that you probably think about too.
Yeah, I feel like it's tough in France, and when my in-laws travel to like London, for example, they already see a huge difference. And you were talking about like two countries that are very close to one another, and there's already a huge difference between the two. So as in
acceptance and so on.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, okay. I mean, there's a lot of work to be done for sure, and there's opening a dialogue and education, and it's not an easy era that Muslims are living in today.
Yeah, we have to fight it on a lot of fronts. Like we have to fight misconceptions, we have to fight extremism, we have to fight like a lot of things that we have to make sure that our voices are heard in a way that's proper. Going back to this book, as I know you've shown me a lot of stuff in this book throughout. Yeah. So is there like a guiding woman that you look up to in Muslim society today?
Queen Rania, I was saying earlier. The Queen
I saw you had quoted her in the book.
Yeah. So I quoted her in the book. I think the way she talks about like these difficult issues, in society and in politics. I love her approach. I mean, she's really open-minded, and she's well seen in the Western world as well as in the Middle East. Yeah. And so she I think she's one of these few people who have this very positive voice and who can really make a change in the world. Right.
Yeah. I think Queen Rania is definitely a very positive example.
Yeah, she is.
Of a modern Muslim woman.
Exactly, yeah. Like I said, there was Malala as well.
Malala she's always in the news. She's won a Nobel Peace Prize, I think, or something, right?
Yeah, a couple of years ago. She's great. So, I mean, there are a lot of women. I mean, even here...
her story is crazy, though, right? Her story is absolutely crazy. Like, she was shot...
Right. By the
Taliban. And then she was supposed to die, but she didn't. Because that was the aim, was to actually, she was shot in the head, I think.
Yeah, and she was.
Yes, that's a crazy story that you've survived that, and then you've survived not to just do that, but you've survived to just fight against the very idea that shot you. Do you know what I mean? And you've won. And that's
And she's still, working hard at it. And she's, I love that she promotes education for women. I mean, these are the women who raise your children. And so, women education seems like a must. I mean, there's just no way around it.
I mean, in this day and age, not having it is absurd to a point. Like we should be a thing that's the norm across the world, and well, the question of genders as well is now is a topic that we're having. I mean, you look at areas around the world where they discuss gender, not just gender roles, but also gender identity, and that topic has really reached an area where we're like, where it's way beyond education now. Today we haven't had those basics down in many countries, and that's why we need to make sure that we've addressed these issues. We make sure that we have education covered through all these societies for sure.
Absolutely.
And hopefully your book one day would be one of those things that
I hope. I mean, that's my
little kids can.
That's my small contribution. And it kind of, I was never a feminist really before writing the book, but as I was writing it, it just made me realize, like, women can do everything, once I gave birth, to be honest with you, I was like, okay, women, our bodies can do this. It's just insane, and I knew that, but once you really deliver a baby, then you're like, wow.
I did that?
Yeah, exactly. And
so do you identify as a feminist?
I would, like I said, so that was an eye-opener for me, first of all, 2 years ago, but then, but also the more research I was doing, and the more I realized that, women do have rights in Islam, people try to hide that from us. They don't want us to know, maybe. So it's our job as a Muslim woman to seek the knowledge and to really find out what they are. I highlighted the most important ones, but I mean, it really applies to your, everyday life. And what was your question again?
If you identify as a feminist.
I lost track of it, yeah. So yes, I do.
It's hot in here. That's
exactly, it's getting to my brain. So yeah, no, definitely. Since the book, I think it's turned me into a feminist.
Because I think I had like maybe 2 women who identified as feminists on this program before.
Yeah.
So you're the third.
Okay.
So I don't want people to think this is a feminism program.
No, I think feminism for me is not about like putting down men or like I'm not anti-man or nothing like that. It's just for me acknowledging like, women are powerful and we can do it all, like we can be like CEOs, we can be, great mothers, and we can multitask. And
well, writing this book is your contribution, I think, to that cause for the Muslim woman, I think, because at the end of the day, you're telling Muslim women like, yo, you need to know your rights.
Yeah.
You need to know what you can do.
Right.
You need to know that doing ABC is well within your world of rights and possibilities, and that's well afforded to you by your faith and your doctrine, and that's very good for people to, and that's, I think, a very good contribution for you to actually give towards like the Muslim, the female Muslim society. That's, I mean, that's definitely, so you could say more about feminism than many others who claim to be feminists, right? So
I mean,
I'm not knocking anyone, by the way. I'm just saying, you never know.
I mean, really, it was, I think I wanted to really empower women with this book, to give them the tools to be like a better version of themselves and educate themselves, and to really be able to live their own journey at their own pace.
Well, I know you're launching this book tonight.
Yeah.
It'll be available.
It'll be in Kinokuniya, Magrudi, available online as well. www.biglittlestepsbook.com.
Right.
And also we're working on the ebook format. So whoever has a Kindle or Kobo, or they'll be able to download it from anywhere in the world, which is great.
Excellent. And any global publications?
I hope that it can be translated into many more languages and reach more countries, and I'm just really trying to promote Islam in a positive way for women, so I just hope the message can reach as many people as possible. And
I think it's important, you said you wanted to start a dialogue, and I think starting a dialogue, and that's something consistent that comes out of this podcast, is I always say we have to have conversations.
Yeah, which is what you're doing. That's your contribution, is to open the dialogue.
That's what I'm trying to do, and, whether it's talking, whatever it is, I think if you put this up just solely online, then you're going to get a lot of people like, oh, what does that mean, blah, 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 blah. But sitting with you and talking and going through your thought process and your experience and so on, makes people view your contribution, your thoughts, everything that you just said in a totally different light, and in a very understanding way. And I think if there's anything that I would like for this podcast to do, is to promote understanding with various topics, and I think this is the first time actually on this podcast that we talk about faith and Islam, like in this depth. I think we've spoken previously about Muslim issues and how to like sort of because a friend of mine or a guest of mine, the podcast started something called the Arab Edition to bring Arabs to talk more about Arab stories.
Right,
but this is the first time I think we talk about Islam in particular. So
it's Ramadan, so it's a good time.
Well, I was about to say, this is going to be my Ramadan episode. So
exactly.
So there you go. But thank you so much for like feeling comfortable enough to tell me your experience and your story, and
thank you for having me.
And I think you're going to blow up after this podcast for sure.
I think this will be the turning point for the book.
This is it. This is it. I imagine like next year, like in a year or 2 years down the line, you're sitting there in like your mansion,
with Big Little Steps the movie.
Big Little Steps the movie, like you become this like J.K. Rowling as of Muslim, female writers, But no, I wish nothing but the best for you, honestly.
I appreciate it.
And I hope, your journey continues.
Thank
your
you.
journey of substance continues, and I hope this book, does really well. So
thank you. I appreciate it.
So and thank you for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
This has been fun.
Yes.
All right.
Good to catch up with you always.
Yeah. All right, Mathilde. Well, good luck, and good luck tonight on your launch.
Yeah, can't wait. And come along. You're welcome.
Like I said, I have people coming over for iftar today.
Okay.
And
bring them along too.
Arabs like to stay and just like maybe it goes from iftar to suhoor. So you never know. It might stay on. But thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks.